Nashville has this way of making people believe in magic. Walk down Broadway on any Friday night and you'll see it in the eyes of wide-eyed dreamers clutching guitar cases, convinced they're just one song away from stardom. The city hums with possibility, wrapped in neon lights and the smell of barbecue, where every corner seems to whisper, "Your life could change here." It's intoxicating, this promise of transformation. But like most intoxicating things, Nashville can also destroy you. On March 12, 2020, while the rest of America was just beginning to grasp the reality of a global pandemic, a construction worker at 497 Old Hickory Boulevard was having the worst day of his career. Picture this poor guy, probably thinking about lunch or weekend plans, when he spots a white Acura sedan that had taken a violent tumble down an embankment and kissed a tree with fatal intimacy. His 911 call tells the story of a man whose voice shakes with the knowledge that some images never leave your mind. Two people, pinned really bad, obviously deceased. You can almost hear him trying to make sense of what he's seeing, his brain struggling to process the unnatural way human bodies can fold when physics meets flesh. When police arrived, they found something that would haunt seasoned investigators. The male victim was crammed into the passenger floorboard like a discarded puppet, his feet pushed impossibly into the car's ceiling. Behind him, Holly Williams lay wedged between seats in a position that screamed deliberate placement rather than accident physics. Here's the thing about car crashes. They have their own brutal logic. Bodies get thrown, glass explodes in predictable patterns, metal crumples according to the laws of momentum and force. This scene violated every one of those laws. When they pulled the Acura from its resting place, investigators noticed something eerily wrong. Shattered passenger windows, but no glass scattered around the crash site. Anyone who's seen a real accident knows glass goes everywhere, twinkling like deadly diamonds in the aftermath. Here, there was nothing but an unsettling cleanliness that made experienced cops' skin crawl. The truth, when it emerged from the coroner's examination, was as brutal as it was simple. Both Holly and Bill had been shot in the head. This wasn't tragic bad luck on a dangerous road. This was execution, dressed up in the costume of automotive misfortune.
Before we dive in, do me one quick favor. If this story pulls you in, hit the like button and subscribe. It takes 1 second, but it helps these cases reach thousands more people who need to see them.
The female victim was soon identified as Holly Williams, age 33, known around East Nashville for her bright personality and restless spirit. The male beside her was William Bill Lanway, 36, a man with a complicated history but a clear affection for Holly. They had been dating on and off for several months, their relationship intense and sometimes stormy, yet grounded in the familiar push and pull of two people trying to rebuild their lives. Holly Williams arrived in Nashville carrying the kind of dreams that small Tennessee towns manufacture by the thousands. Born nearby Murfreesboro, she'd trained as an esthetician, a profession built on the beautiful irony of helping others feel confident in their skin while often struggling to feel comfortable in your own. Friends remember Holly as that rare person who could light up a room simply by walking into it. She had one of those laughs that was genuinely infectious, the kind that made strangers turn around and smile without knowing why. She was generous to a fault, the type who'd give you her last $20 if you needed it, then figure out how to eat ramen for a week without complaint. Her friends often joked that Holly collected strays, both human and animal, unable to resist anyone or anything that seemed lost or hungry. Christmas transformed Holly into something approaching pure joy. "It's the season of Holly," she'd announce every December, absolutely delighted by the cosmic coincidence of her name. She'd decorate her apartment like a winter wonderland, buy gifts she couldn't afford for people she'd just met, and somehow make everyone around her believe in magic for a few weeks each year. There was something almost childlike about her holiday enthusiasm, as if she could recapture some innocence that life had tried to steal from her.
Because life had indeed tried to steal plenty from Holly Williams,
Her childhood read like a textbook on how divorce can devastate a family. When her parents' marriage imploded, it took Holly's sense of security with it. The aftermath left her completely estranged from her biological mother, one of those family wounds that never quite heals, leaving you forever wondering what you did wrong and whether love is something you can actually count on. Perhaps that's why Holly developed what her friends gently called a type. She seemed magnetically drawn to damaged men, the kind who needed fixing, needed saving, needed someone to believe in them when they'd stopped believing in themselves. It was as if Holly thought she could love people back to wholeness, not understanding that broken people often cut the hands that try to help them. What many in Holly's circle didn't know, though she was surprisingly open about it with close friends, was that since turning 18, she'd been working as an escort under the name Layla Love. This wasn't some dark secret she carried in shame. For Holly, it was simply practical economics. Nashville is an expensive city to chase dreams in, and esthetician work doesn't exactly pay rent in the trendy neighborhoods where young dreams feel possible. Her clients were wealthy men who paid not just in cash, but in the kind of expensive gifts that retail workers can only window shop for. Jewelry that caught light like trapped stars, furniture that belonged in magazines, vacations to places she'd only seen in movies. For a young woman working 2 jobs and still struggling to afford the life she wanted, escort work offered a shortcut to financial breathing room. Her friends who knew about her double life weren't judgmental. They worried. They worried about her safety, about the kind of men who sought out escort services, about what this work might be doing to her already fragile sense of self-worth. But Holly seemed to handle it with the same cheerful practicality she applied to everything else. It was just another way to survive while chasing something better. If Nashville's party scene had an unofficial mayor, Bill Lanway would have been a strong candidate for the office. Walk into any bar on Broadway, in Midtown, or the Gulch with Bill, and it was like watching a one-man Cheers episode unfold. He knew every bartender, bouncer, and regular patron. More importantly, they all knew him, and most seemed genuinely happy to see him walk through the door. Bill was one of those people who made parties happen simply by showing up. He had an infectious energy that turned ordinary Tuesday nights into memorable adventures, the kind of guy who could convince you to stay out until 3 a.m. on a work night and somehow make you grateful for the hangover the next day. His friends describe him as someone who lived life at full volume, every emotion amplified, every experience pushed to its natural extreme. By day, Bill worked as an auto mechanic, a job that suited his hands-on personality and gave him something tangible to fix in a world that often felt unfixable. There's something therapeutic about mechanical work when your own life feels broken. Engines follow logical rules. Problems have clear solutions, and with enough skill and patience, most things can be made to run again. But Bill Lanway carried trauma that no amount of mechanical expertise could repair. His story began with the kind of childhood horror that reshapes a person's DNA. At 3.5 years old, an age when most children are learning to tie their shoes and worried about monsters under the bed, Bill witnessed real monsters in his own living room. On Thanksgiving Day 1977, Bill's father held their family hostage before stabbing their mother to death as Bill and his sister watched. Try to imagine being that small child, watching the person who's supposed to protect you destroy the person who brought you into the world. The human mind isn't equipped to process such betrayal and violence, especially a child's mind. It's the kind of trauma that doesn't just leave scars. It rewrites your fundamental understanding of safety, love, and what human beings are capable of doing to each other. Bill was raised by an aunt and uncle who loved him fiercely and tried to give him stability, but some wounds are too deep for even the most devoted parenting to completely heal. He grew into a man who lived with one foot always ready to run, who loved intensely but trusted cautiously, who sometimes struggled to control emotions that had been twisted by trauma before he was old enough to understand what emotions even were. For a while, it seemed like Bill might overcome his dark beginning. He had a daughter, Madison, who became the absolute center of his universe. Madison was one of those children who radiate pure joy, and she adored her daddy completely. Bill discovered that being a father gave him something he'd never had, a chance to create the kind of safe, loving childhood he'd been denied. With Madison, he could be the protector instead of the one needing protection. Then, in September 2011, 4-year-old Madison was diagnosed with an aggressive brain cancer. Picture Bill, already carrying the weight of childhood trauma, watching his baby girl, his reason for hope, his redemption story, fight a battle she couldn't win. They tried everything: treatments that made her tiny body sick, experimental procedures that offered false hope, prayers that seemed to bounce off hospital ceilings. Madison died as Bill held her hand, and something inside him died with her. Friends say the light went out of his eyes permanently. The fun-loving guy who'd been everyone's favorite drinking buddy became angry, unpredictable, consumed by a rage that had nowhere healthy to go. He lashed out at Madison's mother, Dana, as if her grief was somehow competing with his. He damaged property, said things he couldn't take back, pushed away the one person who understood his loss. When Dana finally left him, because living with someone's raw, unprocessed grief can drown you too, Bill had nothing left but Nashville's neon promises of temporary escape. He threw himself into the party scene with desperate intensity, trying to drink and dance and laugh his way out of a pain that had moved into his bones. But temporary escape is exactly that, temporary. The hurt was always waiting for him in the quiet moments, in the spaces between songs, in the morning light that made everything look stark and unforgiving. Holly and Bill met at a music festival in 2018, two damaged souls drawn to each other like magnets with opposing poles, attracted precisely because they shouldn't be. Both were regulars in Nashville's nightlife ecosystem, but somehow their paths hadn't crossed until that moment, when the universe decided to play its cruelest joke. Their relationship was doomed from the start, though neither was wise enough to recognize it. Holly, with her compulsive need to fix broken things, saw Bill's pain and thought she could love him back to wholeness. Bill, drowning in grief and trauma, mistook Holly's nurturing nature for the kind of unconditional love he'd lost when Madison died. It was a recipe for disaster disguised as romance. What started as passionate attraction quickly devolved into something toxic and cyclical. They'd have explosive fights that ended with dramatic breakups, followed by desperate reconciliations that felt like true love until the next explosion. Friends watched this pattern with growing alarm, recognizing the signs of a relationship that was slowly consuming both participants. Holly began confiding to friends that she was genuinely scared of Bill. His jealousy had transformed into something poisonous. He wanted to control who she saw, where she went, how she spent her time. The trauma that lived inside Bill taught him that everyone he loved eventually left or died, so he tried to prevent abandonment through control and intimidation. It's a tragically common pattern: hurt people hurting people, passing trauma along like a virus. In December 2019, their dysfunction crossed into criminal territory. During an argument, Bill broke Holly's car windshield and punched her in the mouth, the kind of violence that leaves both physical and psychological scars. He was arrested, but Holly, following the heartbreaking script that so many abuse victims know by heart, initially declined to press charges. Love and fear create a twisted logic that makes defending your abuser feel like loyalty.
By March 2020, the violence had escalated beyond anything Holly could rationalize away. During a fight at her apartment, Bill held his hand over her mouth, cutting off her ability to breathe. In that moment, Holly experienced something every abuse victim fears: the realization that the person claiming to love you is capable of taking your life. She managed to break free and escape, but the message was unmistakably clear. This time, Holly found the courage that had been building slowly through months of friends' concern and her own growing terror. She went to the police and pressed charges. Bill was arrested for aggravated assault and false imprisonment, serious felonies that finally matched the seriousness of his behavior. Though he was released on bond, Holly knew she'd crossed a line that would enrage him beyond measure. Terrified of what Bill might do in retaliation, Holly turned her apartment into something approaching a fortress. She had several security cameras installed and changed her locks, adding a heavy-duty deadbolt that would hopefully keep her safe. The cameras would prove prophetic. They captured Bill trying to break into her apartment after discovering the new lock, though fortunately Holly wasn't home during his attempted break-in. Then Holly's beloved dog Max disappeared during one of their March confrontations. A few days later, Max was found dead on a roadside. Holly was convinced Bill had killed her pet as punishment for pressing charges against him, the kind of calculated cruelty that abusers use to send messages. If you cross me, I'll destroy everything you love. 9 days before their deaths, Holly filed for a restraining order against Bill. On paper, she was doing everything right, pressing charges, documenting abuse, seeking legal protection. But as too many women have learned, legal documents are just paper when faced with someone whose decided violence is the solution to their problems. Given Bill and Holly's documented history of domestic violence, when they were found dead together, the initial theory wrote itself. Bill had finally followed through on his implied threats, killing Holly before turning the gun on himself. Murder-suicide was the obvious explanation, and it made tragic sense to everyone who knew about their relationship. Even Bill's own friends admitted his recent behavior toward Holly had become genuinely frightening. The sweet, fun-loving guy they'd known had been replaced with someone whose pain had thickened into something dangerous. It seemed entirely plausible that his trauma and grief had finally pushed him over the edge into irreversible violence. But crime scenes tell their own stories, and this one was whispering inconsistencies that bothered experienced investigators. Sometimes the details that seem smallest turn out to be the most important, the loose threads that unravel entire narratives when you pull them. First, there was the positioning of the bodies. Bill was found crammed into the passenger floorboard, Holly wedged behind him in the back seat. If Bill had shot Holly and then killed himself, basic logic demanded an answer to one crucial question. Who was driving the car when it went off the road? Why wasn't the supposed perpetrator in the driver's seat? Second, neither victim's cell phone was found anywhere in or around the vehicle. In 2020, asking people to leave home without their phones was like asking them to leave without their clothes. It simply didn't happen, especially for someone like Holly, who'd been living in legitimate fear for her safety. Her phone would have been her lifeline, her way to call for help if Bill approached her. But the detail that transformed suspicious into certainty was the complete absence of a weapon. If Bill had shot Holly and then himself, the weapon should have been right there in the car. Firearms don't grow legs and walk away from crime scenes. They don't evaporate or dissolve or magically transport themselves to other locations. These inconsistencies forced investigators to consider a possibility that would transform a tragic but straightforward domestic violence case into something far more sinister. Someone had killed both Holly and Bill, then carefully arranged the scene to look like a murder-suicide. Someone with enough knowledge of their relationship to know that Bill kills Holly would be the investigators' first assumption. But who would want both of them dead? What could possibly motivate someone to commit double murder and then go to such elaborate lengths to cover their tracks? The answers, when they finally emerged, would reveal a conspiracy so twisted and calculated that it would shock investigators who thought they'd seen everything.
The truth was, Holly and Bill weren't just victims of domestic violence or tragic circumstances. They were collateral damage in someone else's desperate attempt to keep their secrets buried. And the web of lies, blackmail, and hired killers that had entangled them stretched far beyond Nashville, reaching into the kind of wealthy, respectable circles where reputation is everything, and some people will pay any price to protect it. What investigators were about to uncover was a murder-for-hire plot so elaborate, so coldly professional, that it would make their initial murder-suicide theory seem almost naive in comparison. Someone had decided that 2 lives were worth less than $25,000 in blackmail money. Someone had concluded that execution was easier than embarrassment. The hunt for that someone was just beginning. The security cameras Holly had installed to protect herself from Bill would end up revealing something far more sinister than domestic violence. As detectives reviewed the footage, they found disturbing clips that painted a very different picture of her final days. The cameras had captured Bill's attempts to break into her apartment after she changed the locks. But they also recorded something else. Other men coming to Holly's door, asking for her by name, trying to hide their faces from the camera. These weren't random visitors. On March 10, 2020, just 2 days before the murders, 3 men dressed in black with covered faces repeatedly shouted Holly's name outside her apartment. They claimed they just wanted to talk, but their behavior suggested otherwise. Holly was so terrified, she barricaded her door with a safety bar, refusing to come out. One man's face was partially visible on camera, giving investigators their first real lead. Despite public appeals for information, these mysterious visitors remained unidentified, for now. Digging deeper into Holly's life, detectives made a discovery that opened new investigative doors. Her work as an escort under the name Lila Love meant she had clients, men who knew her, had her contact information, and might have reasons to want her silenced. One client caught their attention immediately. Someone calling himself Jimmy Green had been messaging Holly on both her personal and work phones. But Jimmy Green was using a pinger app, a service that creates fake phone numbers over the internet. People don't use fake numbers unless they're trying to hide something. The email connected to the account was equally suspicious. Jimmy_Green3@gmail.com with the account name Agent 47, reference to a video game character known for being a professional assassin. This wasn't someone trying to be discreet. This was someone with a dark sense of humor about concealing their identity. Following the digital breadcrumbs, police traced the IP address to a shocking discovery. Jimmy Green was actually Adam Carey, a 30-year-old former Marine with special operations training. Carey lived in North Carolina and had a criminal record for impersonating a police officer and weapons charges. More importantly, his driver's license photo matched the partially visible face from Holly's security footage. Carey wasn't working alone. His pinger account revealed communications with Brian Brockway, a 46-year-old former Marine also working in private security based in Austin, Texas. On March 9th, Adam had sent Brian something called a Tennessee sitrep, military speak for a situation report, containing detailed information about Bill and Holly's schedules and addresses. But the trail led even further up the chain. Adam had also shared this intelligence with Gilad Peled, a 47-year-old Israeli national who claimed to be former Israeli Defense Forces and Mossad. Peled ran his own security company called Speartip Security Group in Austin and was apparently coordinating this operation. The investigation took a dramatic turn when detectives identified the man pulling the strings, Erik Charles Maund, a 46-year-old partner in his family's Austin auto dealership. Maund had been one of Holly's escort clients, hiring her services several times under the fake name Eric Moore. In February 2020, Maund had visited Nashville and texted Holly, "Good morning, beautiful. I will meet you in the bar like last time." It seemed like a routine transaction between a client and escort, until Bill Lanway entered the picture. On March 1st, 2020, Bill hacked into Holly's escort account and found detailed information about her clients, including a wealthy businessman named Erik Maund. Seeing a chance to make money, Bill started texting Maund, demanding $25,000 to keep quiet about his relationship with Holly.
For Maund, who was married and well-known in his community, this kind of exposure could ruin everything: his marriage, his reputation, and his family's car dealership. Most people in that situation might have paid the money or gone to the police to report the blackmail, but Erik Maund chose a very different path. Instead of giving in, Maund quickly hired Gil Peled, asking him to find out who Layla Love really was and to investigate the threats. At first, it was meant to be just a background check, but as Bill kept demanding payment, the job turned into something much darker. Gil then brought in Brian Brockway, who asked his brother Chad to help. But Gil lied to Chad, saying they were looking for a missing girl who might be caught in sex trafficking. Believing that story, Chad began gathering detailed information about Holly, thinking he was helping to save someone. Brian also hired Adam Carey, and together they confronted Holly at her apartment, moments that were captured by her security cameras. During their investigation, they discovered that Bill, not Holly, was the one behind the blackmail. Then, on March 11, 2020, Bill called Maund, likely to settle the payment. Maund panicked, terrified that his wife might pick up the phone and find out about his secret life. That phone call would end up sealing Bill's fate. After that conversation, something shifted. According to later testimony, Brian Brockway told Gil that he and Adam were authorized to kill both Bill and Holly if necessary. Gil claimed that Maund had approved the plan, agreeing to pay $60,000 for each murder. The financial trail supported this claim. On the day of the murders, Maund wired $150,000 to Gil's account. Over the next year, he would transfer nearly $1 million total, a staggering amount that suggested this wasn't just payment for investigation services. On March 12, 2020, Holly and Bill left her apartment around 11:40 p.m. Security cameras captured Bill briefly returning inside before they both departed for what would be their final journey. Shortly after they left the camera's view, the audio picked up the sound of a car starting, followed by multiple gunshots and the terrified screams of a man and woman. Adam Carey and Brian Brockway had been waiting for them in the parking lot. Bill was shot first. He was the target, the blackmailer who had created this entire mess. But in the chaos of the ambush, Holly was also shot in the chest. The killers faced a problem. She was still alive, and now she was a witness who could identify them. They couldn't let her live. Loading both bodies into the car, they drove to a construction site where Holly was shot again, this time fatally in the head. It was a cold, calculated execution of a woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The killers then positioned the bodies to make it look like a murder-suicide, pushed the car down an embankment, and disappeared into the night. Within hours, the Pinger account used for communication was deleted, rental cars were returned, and Adam drove Brian to Memphis, where he caught a flight back to Austin. The investigation took 2 years to piece together, a complex puzzle of digital evidence, financial records, and witness testimony. A bizarre twist came when Erik Maund actually left a glowing online review for Gil's Spear Tip Security Group, praising their professionalism and efficiency. Given that their service had involved double murder, this review raised some eyebrows and prompted deeper FBI investigation into Maund's finances. The challenge for investigators was proving that Maund had ordered murders, not just hired investigators. They launched an undercover operation, getting Chad Brockway, who had been deceived about the job's true nature, to cooperate. Chad contacted Adam Carey about a fictional hit job, and Adam openly quoted $60,000 for murder, confirming he was indeed a killer for hire. Chad then met with his brother Brian while wearing a wire. Brian boasted about overpowering Bill and expressed disturbing admiration for Adam's willingness to shoot a woman. The complete lack of remorse in his voice chilled everyone who heard the recording.
But investigators still needed direct evidence against the man they believed had ordered the hits, Erik Maund. They convinced Gil Peled to cooperate in exchange for a lighter sentence. Gil made a recorded phone call to Maund, pretending Adam wanted an additional $25,000 to keep quiet about the murders. Maund's response was captured on tape. "I'll pay the guy $25,000, but I think it needs to go away after that. Honestly, I think I'd rather take care of it permanently." Those words sealed his fate. Erik Maund was arrested the next day while on a hunting trip. In November 2023, the trial of Erik Maund, Brian Brockway, and Adam Carey began in Nashville. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters from multiple states sat in the back, notebooks and cameras ready, while family members of Holly and Bill occupied the front rows, holding each other tightly. From the outset, the prosecution presented a narrative that was both simple and terrifying. Maund had hired a team of ex-military contractors to murder Bill and Holly, not as a crime of passion, but as a calculated act to protect his reputation. The prosecution's opening statement painted the timeline with chilling precision. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on technology. Holly's apartment security cameras had captured the movements of Carey and Brockway before the murders. In court, footage played on large monitors, masked men pacing outside the building, voices recorded calling Holly's name, and fleeting glimpses of the attackers as they prepared to strike. Each clip was followed by meticulous commentary, timestamps, GPS overlays, and comparisons to phone data that confirmed the presence of the accused. For many jurors, the evidence was both irrefutable and horrifying. The lives of two ordinary people had been surveilled, tracked, and finally destroyed by strangers who had treated murder as a mission objective. Digital communications were next. Encrypted messages between Maund and the contractors showed discussions of payment, scheduling, and closing out the operation. One text read, "We're handling Target 1. Ensure secondary is neutralized if necessary." Another, "Balance transferred. Operation complete." Even seasoned federal agents watching the trial found themselves shivering at the cold precision of the operation. Testimonies brought the human element into sharp relief. Gilad Peled, who had facilitated parts of the operation, described his initial belief that he was participating in a simple security matter. He recounted driving to Nashville with Brockway and Carey, observing their preparation and later understanding the deadly intent of the mission. His voice, calm yet somber, conveyed both fear and regret. Most haunting, however, was the audio recording captured outside Holly's apartment. Gunshots and screams. The prosecution played it for the jury in its entirety. No one in the room could ignore the raw terror in those final moments. Holly's screams, followed by Bill's, echoed in the courtroom, reminding everyone that this wasn't just a story of wealth and power, it was a story of human suffering. The defense tried multiple angles. Brockway and Carey's lawyers argued that their clients believed they were only meant to intimidate, not kill, and that any fatal outcome was unplanned. They presented character witnesses describing Brockway's supposed law-abiding life before the plot, and Carey's military service as evidence of discipline rather than criminal intent. Maund's defense was more complex. His lawyers claimed he never directly instructed anyone to commit murder. He allegedly intended only to uncover the blackmail scheme and, if necessary, ensure Bill was dissuaded from further action. But the prosecution dismantled these claims with precision. Digital communications, bank transfers, and witness testimonies created a web that pointed directly to premeditation. Each deflection only highlighted the overwhelming evidence that this was a coordinated, intentional act. The courtroom became a space where grief and justice collided. For many jurors, Holly and Bill ceased being victims in a news story. They became real people, with real dreams and real losses. Their humanity shone through the procedural recounting of events, and their absence weighed heavily on everyone present. After 2 weeks of testimony and 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdicts. Adam Carey, guilty of murder for hire resulting in death, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and kidnapping resulting in death. Byron Brockway, guilty of the same charges as Carey. Erik Maund, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, but acquitted of kidnapping resulting in death. For a moment, there was relief. Justice, in some form, had been served. Families wept quietly. Reporters scribbled furiously. The courtroom seemed to exhale. Yet beneath the relief lingered the haunting awareness Holly and Bill would never return. The legal narrative, however, didn't end there. Months later, in 2024, an administrative error was discovered. Jurors had been given exhibits not meant to be admitted, while other critical evidence had been withheld. Most notably, an unedited recording containing statements specifically excluded for constitutional reasons had been presented during deliberation. The appellate court determined that these missteps constituted structural error, a flaw severe enough to undermine the fairness of the trial. Despite the overwhelming evidence of guilt, a new trial was ordered for all three defendants. The announcement of the retrial shook the Nashville community. Families and friends who had spent months hoping for closure now faced the uncomfortable truth. The legal system, meticulous and thorough as it often seemed, could falter. News outlets ran headlines emphasizing the administrative error, and public discourse swirled with frustration and disbelief. Holly and Bill's families were caught in the middle of this bureaucratic storm. The pain of reliving the tragedy, recounting the surveillance footage, the testimony, the audio of the fatal night was amplified. Yet, amid the grief, there was determination. They were determined that Holly and Bill's names and stories would not be lost in the shuffle of legal proceedings. By early 2025, the retrial commenced. The courtroom bore many similarities to the previous one. Reporters, jurors, and families all in place. But there was a difference now. The defense attorneys were more strategic, having had months to recalibrate. Yet the prosecution entered with a renewed sense of urgency, armed with lessons learned from the first trial. Digital evidence again took center stage. Every frame of Holly's security footage, every time-stamped message, and every bank transfer was presented with painstaking care. Prosecutors emphasized that the defendants had meticulously planned each step, leaving behind a trail that could not be erased. The defense repeated some earlier arguments. Carey and Brockway had been misled about the scope of the operation, and Maund had not explicitly ordered murder. But this time, the prosecution anticipated these claims, presenting corroborating testimony from Gil Peled and Chad Brockway that reinforced premeditation. The repeated statements about payment, authorization, and neutralizing both victims were particularly damning. Once again, family testimony brought tears to the courtroom. Holly's mother spoke of the early mornings spent buying gifts for friends, the laughter that filled her tiny apartment, and the girl who had a magical ability to make people feel loved. Bill's sister spoke of his resilience, the pain he endured, and his unwavering love for Madison. Each word humanized the victims further, ensuring that jurors remembered that behind the case files and recordings were real people with real dreams and losses. Observers noted a palpable shift in the jury's demeanor. The repeated emphasis on premeditation, combined with the humanization of Holly and Bill, appeared to leave little room for doubt. The raw humanity of the victims was impossible to ignore. After several weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Adam Carey, guilty of murder for hire resulting in death, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and kidnapping resulting in death. Byron Brockway, guilty of the same charges as Carey. Erik Maund, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, as well as accessory charges related to premeditation. Unlike the first trial, the verdict this time carried finality. Mandatory sentences were imposed: life imprisonment without parole for Carey and Brockway, and life sentences for Maund with minimal possibility for appeal.
The courtroom exhaled collectively. Justice, though delayed, had finally been delivered.
For the families of Holly and Bill, no verdict can bring back their loved ones or undo the trauma of their violent deaths. In a city known for music, dreams, and second chances, Holly Williams and Bill Lanway never got theirs. Their story stands as a tragic reminder that behind the bright lights of Nashville, real people struggle with real problems, and sometimes those problems turn deadly in ways no one could predict.
Thank you for watching and staying till the end. Every story we tell is a piece of someone's truth, and your support helps keep their voice alive. If you felt something today, don't just move on. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so together we can keep shining light into the darkest corners of the human mind.